U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo arrived in North Korea today to continue talks with leader Kim Jong-un in an effort to get some concrete commitments toward denuclearization. It's Pompeo's first visit to the country since Kim's historic summit with President Donald Trump in Singapore.
President Trump continues to express optimism over the process, despite intelligence reports that Pyongyang is actually boosting its nuclear and missile program. Pompeo told reporters before Friday's meeting he was seeking to fill in some details on those commitments and continue the momentum toward implementation. Well, let's go now to Washington, D.C. and speak with Jenny Town, managing editor and producer at 38 North. And Jenny, what do you think Secretary Pompeo is going to Pyongyang looking to achieve? And what do you think realistically he can achieve during his visit?
Well, I think he is hoping for some clarification on terms, and I'm sure there are some proposals they're putting on the table. I do think, the expectation of what can be achieved, even in the small amount of time, is a little bit overblown. If you think about it historically, the agreed framework took a year to negotiate, and at that time, North Korea did not have nuclear weapons. It was still a burgeoning fissile material production capability, and the Iran deal took 12 years to negotiate. So I think, there is a lot of pressure on Pompeo to come back with some tangible movements to keep progress moving and to keep some momentum going. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of details yet to be worked out, and if we can either be comprehensive or quick, and I think our preference here is for them to be comprehensive.
Jenny, so there's a lot of pressure on Pompeo. We know what he hopes to be able to deliver to the president, some kind of commitment from North Korea, but isn't part of the concern here revolving around the fact that it's not entirely clear what North Korea wants out of these negotiations?
Well, sure. It's not entirely clear what North Korea wants, and that's part of how we move forward in the negotiations, and that's what they have to figure out. And I think there's probably more that has been said and explained than what has been made public. And the problem is that the parts that have been made public have been very kind of haphazardly expressed. And so there's a lot of details and a lot of context that we don't have and that we probably won't give. But the smattering of details that we've had raises expectations too high. And I think more needs to be done on expectation management. And I think there is going to be pressure on both sides to have some early wins in the process while the negotiations are ongoing, in order to again, sort of solidify this commitment to keep the process going. And I think that's what we're trying to figure out now, is what can some of those terms be and what can some of those measures be.
Jenny, we mentioned these intelligence reports that indicate perhaps a growth, that North Korea is actually expanding its nuclear and missile capabilities. I believe your group 38 North was even the first to come out with this information. It's not been officially confirmed by the U.S. Do you think Secretary Pompeo is going to be discussing with Kim Jong-un this ongoing work and maybe ask them to try to limit it the way they've also agreed to limit the nuclear testing?
Sure. And let's be clear, the work that's being done now is not new work. These are initiatives that had started before the Singapore summit, and that we would expect to continue until there is an agreement in place. And certainly that is part of the negotiations going on. And the parts of the program that would be targeted first, for instance, are the fissile material production, are the missile production capabilities, to put a freeze on the production in order to get a better sense of accounting, of inventory of where we're at, and then work out the details of verification and work out the details of transparency on the larger programs in terms of, what are the actual fissile material stockpiles, what is the actual nuclear stockpile, and can we get an accurate accounting of the full nuclear and missile program infrastructure. But these are not things that North Korea is going to do unilaterally outside of negotiations. And I think, it's important to keep in mind that that an agreement is not yet in place, and that is what we're working towards. And there's a lot of details here to yet be worked out.
Jenny, you mentioned earlier the Iran nuclear deal and how long it took to negotiate. Now, aside from the U.S., the UN and the EU have all imposed sanctions on North Korea following many controversial steps by that country. Realistically, can the U.S. achieve an agreement with North Korea that really holds all alone, with the nation being isolated by the rest of the world?
Well, I think North Korea has worked very hard already and been very successful in making sure that it's not isolated by reestablishing ties with China. It has opened a lot of doors for North Korea that were closed as of December of last year. And those will be doors that will be very hard to close again unless North Korea does something very provocative. And I think that's the reality of what we live in today, is that particular moment in time is gone. And so there is going to be a lot more fraying especially on the edges of the sanctions regime. I think there's going to be a lot more easing of especially unilateral sanctions that a lot of the countries had on North Korea that will open up space for them to do more economic activities. And so I think, it's important then for these gestures to keep moving forward and some gestures to happen and early wins for both the U.S. and for North Korea to keep the negotiation process going and to keep the positive momentum going. But certainly it would be very difficult to go back to the situation we had before the Olympic détente.
Jenny, briefly, Secretary Pompeo, he's also going to be going to Japan. What do you expect that the Japanese want? What is going to be their priorities that they were going to express to Secretary Pompeo?
Well, I think their number one priority is just finding out in more detail what's happening beyond the public dialogue and getting some sense of what's even on the table and where the discussions have gone. I think the South Koreans will probably partake in that as well. And, the communication between the allies at this point is very important to gain sort of their understanding and their approval in this process of what's being put on the table. But certainly the Japanese also care very much about the human rights issue and about the abduction issue and whether or not that's even part of the dialogue at this point, as this is one of the main things that they have built their Japan-DPRK relations on.
Okay, Jenny Tan, 38 North